Okay, so what another incredible panel, and the topic of the future of climate finance is so important, and I think we have a few takeaways from here, which is private and public sector need to work together. We need to explore new ways to generate revenue through other resources and reduce a dependence on fossil fuels. And I think it is really safe to say here that profit with purpose is truly key in order to achieve a sustainable future. And obviously, the time is now, so let's act on this. So, ladies and gentlemen, I actually can't quite believe it. We have our penultimate session of day one coming up. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be delving deeper into the hugely important topic of climate solutions. Our next panel is titled From Risk to Reward, Climate Solutions. And we will be joined by another esteemed panel. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Philip Skinner, Head of the Middle East, North Africa and Pakistan, Grant Co. and Origination Lead for Nature, Private Infrastructure Development, PIDG, Andrew Bailey, who is the Managing Director of BASF Pakistan, Ayla Majid, the ACCA's Global Deputy President and Founder and CEO of Planitive, Matteo Scalabrino, who is the Associate Bankers Without Boundaries, Sadia Dada, Chief Distribution and Marcoms Officer of K Electric, and this wonderful session will be moderated by Sajid Aslam, who is a partner of Spectro Eco LLC USA. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming them to the stage.
So, Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. Guys, we had lunch, we talked about climate, we talked about money. So, Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. Still, some energy, guys. Thank you. I think just picking up from Dr. Fatma, we were talking about earlier the financing side of it. And the biggest change we have seen in a recent world, particularly in the last 4, 5 years or 10 years, climate finance doesn't mean grant money. And I think that's the most important element which we need to understand. When we talk about climate finance or any project which is related with the climate resilience, mitigation and adaptation, we are not talking about the free money there. We are talking about the money which requires ROI. And that's one of a challenge. In my last conversation with GCF as well, one of their director, they highlighted a lot of people put up the projects, and we are not talking about the individual like private companies, we are talking about the governments. They come with a very much grant mindset. And they put up like we need a $2 billion or a $3 billion, and when we ask what is the payback mechanism, most of the time they don't have any reliable or something which is a bankable. And this morning, Aurangzeb also highlighted that specifically, we need bankable project. And Maheen also highlighted the same. Climate finance is just another mode to identify what you are funding, just like a project funding or trade funding or maybe a running finance or a long-term funding, right? So this is the new term which we are using, but it does not change the underlying mechanics. It's required the same risk management, same resilience, and the similar payback mechanism. And most of the time, these investments or a loan specifically are available on a commercial rate. So they could be a blended model, they are, but it could be a proper commercial model. And this panel is specifically is going to explore what are the kind of solutions which exist out there which can help us to really build the climate mitigation, adaptation, or resilience solutions from public sector as well as from a private sector. So broadly, what we will be discussing is categorized into 5 different areas: the nature-based solution, the technology-based solution, then we got infrastructure-based solution, we got a policy and financing-based solution, and then we got the behavior and cultural-based solution. And all these 5 categories lead to a certain climate mitigation, adaptation, or resilience solution side of it. Second part, which world has recognized in the last year or 2 since COP26 onward, the cost of inaction is too high as compared to cost of action. So the cost of action is lower. So one thing which we have learned over the period, and I'll use Urdu there, हम सोच बदलेंगे तो हालात बदलेंगे, हालात बदलने से सोच नहीं बदलने वाली. So सोचने का तरीका हमारा जो है, that's what we need to change. How we are going to get out of that grant and the free money mindset, and we look climate as a right kind of opportunity which can generate money, return, and at the same time, the solution towards mitigation and adaptation. So thank you, the esteemed panel. We are going to start with you. And just quickly, starting with Philip Skinner, you've been engaged in a lot of nature-based solution in past in terms of the financing arrangement. So what is the best nature-based solution you have encountered so far, which has got the impact and the viability at the same time and have a return for the people who are involved there? So any example you can share from a nature-based solution side?
Okay, thank you, Sajid, and it's a pleasure to be here with such esteemed company. Thank you. Maybe just to introduce myself, to set a bit of a context to my comments. So I've been working with Garanco, which is a guarantee company backed by a number of G12 governments in Pakistan since 2017. And I've been traveling here 2 or 3 times a year, financing traditional infrastructure projects such as renewable energy projects or electricity distribution and things like that. In 2021, I was privileged to become one of the directors of Infrazam in Pakistan, who you just heard from Maheen on the previous company. So we both belong to the same group of companies, which is known as the Private Infrastructure Development Group. And we ourselves have been thinking about how can we integrate nature-based solutions more purposely into the type of investment activity that we are conducting, both in Pakistan and internationally. And now there are 2 pillars to that. The first pillar is looking at our existing infrastructure projects and seeing how we can apply a nature-based, a nature lens to our investment criteria. So how do we assess a project and its impact on nature, how we can improve the positive aspects of that and reduce the negative aspects of that. But also, almost most interesting, is how you can integrate nature-based solutions into the project itself to de-risk that project, make it more resilient and adaptive to future climate risks. The second pillar of the way that we're looking at nature-based solutions is to invest into nature itself. So this is looking at the infrastructure services that nature provides for the hundreds of millions of people, particularly in rural communities, who depend on nature for ecosystem services, as we call them. Think water, shelter, food. And if we don't protect those natural sources of natural infrastructure, we are just going to exacerbate urban migration problems and increase the pressure on urban infrastructure. So these are the 2 pillars we look. And to bring those 2 pillars to life, maybe I will just give 2 case studies that have inspired me that are actually right here in Pakistan. Okay? And so Pakistan is in a good place when it comes to nature-based solutions and that it needs to capitalize on, and maybe I'll come back to that later. But the first example of integrating nature into how to protect an infrastructure asset, a great example is the Zephyr wind farm. And what they have done there is, instead of building a big concrete wall around the wind farm, they have planted mangroves and restored mangroves. And it's estimated that the mangroves themselves will save the project a total of $7 million of maintenance costs over the life of that project, relative to if they'd invested in a concrete wall, with all of the negative effects that would have had on climate as well, and nature. So that's integrating nature into an infrastructure project. Then investing into nature in and of itself, there's the much publicized Delta Blue Carbon Mangrove Restoration Scheme here in Sindh. It is an incredible transaction, right, that has managed to attract climate finance from big multinational companies like Microsoft in US dollars during times of high currency stress here in Pakistan. And the impacts of those projects, I talked about the ecosystem services. I mean, there's 11,000 jobs associated with the first round of that project. You've got fisheries improved and agricultural lands protected from storm surges as a result of a nature-based infrastructure project in mangroves. So Pakistan has made a good start, but one thing that I must highlight is working on this theme of nature-based solutions across multiple geographies, across Africa and Asia, is that we are starting to see other countries stride ahead. And I think one of the themes that Dr. Shamsad brought out quite well in her speech was around this is a highly competitive market. And the natural capital funds and other big money investors out there are looking at other markets with more developed regulatory regimes around carbon tax and other things, and saying how can we, and looking at places like, say, Ghana or Kenya, Rwanda, Indonesia, who've got more developed in this area. So Pakistan has made a good start, but it needs to keep up with the race in this competition for capital to get these nature-based projects off the ground.
No, thank you, Phillips. And I think the key highlight is that it's a catch-22. It's not no more the scenario, tell me how much amount I have or how much budget I have and I'll create a project around it. So now it's more around that, how many bankable projects you have and you can attract the money around the world. So I think that's the equation which we need to balance in the right way from a thought process and execution perspective as well. So Andrew, coming to your side, your organization is very much into the chemical side, and then you have got the agriculture products as well. And there's a very interesting component which you normally, the BSF talk about, is the C-cycling and the recycling. And so let's say what the examples we can see there as a one of a solution from a recycling and C-cycling, and how the waste management is happening outside Pakistan, inside Pakistan. Some of the examples where we can learn what we can integrate in our businesses in Pakistan.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Perhaps before jumping into the recycling, I'd like to just give a little bit of context to BASF. Is that better? So BASF is one of the leading chemical companies in the world, and chemistry is all around us, from the clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive, the decorative paints. Everywhere, every side of your life, somewhere chemistry is part of it. BASF operates in large, what we call Verbund sites, which are large interconnected plants, typically up to 120 different plants all connected together. So the byproducts of one feed the next plant. That gives us scale across the world. We operate 6 in the US, in Europe, and then 2 in China. And part of when we produce the chemicals, the first part is obviously using renewable energy. So typically in Germany, we're looking to reduce fossil base and replace it with solar or wind. And in the case of wind, we've just inaugurated this year one of the largest wind farms in the world, 1.3 gigawatts of wind power. So reducing the amount of energy. We're also looking at renewable raw materials, and I'm going to come back to that because that's a very particular part for Pakistan. But then we look at recycling, and to bring it again to Pakistan, we talk about plastics recycling. So if we look at plastics globally over the next, say, 30 years, plastics are going to increase threefold. At the moment, around about only 10% is actually coming from post-consumer waste. The rest is all fossil-based, but that's likely to grow up to about 40%. So with BASF, we've got, together with our partners, we use a process called pyrolysis. It's a thermochemical process, which is basically chemically recycling the part of the plastics that cannot be mechanically recycled. So typically in your bottle, the cap can be recycled, but the softer part cannot be. So this is produced, you produce a pyrolysis oil, which can then be fed back into the start of the value chain to replace and also save fossil base. So typically this is where chemical recycling, or in BASF as we call it, chem cycling, and the products that come from the raw materials that have been recycled get this C-cycle, and this is where the recycling. At the moment we've got a number of large pilot plants around the world, and typically at the moment there's about 240 different products that are produced, some of which we are selling in Pakistan here at the moment. So that's the sort of recycling. But I think chemistry, it's about innovation and how we bring innovation into the mix. And I think if we look at the bio-based raw materials, just going back to the renewable raw materials, using bio-based, using natural resources as a feed product. So typically palm oil can be used replacing fossil fuels. We're also looking very actively for products that can be produced in the agricultural space here in Pakistan and using that in our value chain. And if we look over the next probably 20 years, 80% of global chemical production is going to shift to Asia, into countries which border Pakistan. So we have a very real opportunity here in Pakistan to produce raw materials that typically BASF can use in our production processes, to produce detergents that are typically sold here, detergents that use less water, in the textile industry. So there's many different applications where innovation coming from renewable raw materials. So this is really where BASF is really focusing on.
And do you have any innovation and R&D center in Pakistan as well, or?
So typically, the R&D facilities are located close to where the production is, and typically BASF has around 10,000 employees based just in R&D. I think this year we're spending over $2 billion just on R&D. And this is everything from trying to find catalytic converters that, for instance, in a two-wheeler motorbike here can reduce the emissions, etc. It can be used on aeroplanes, on typically a shark skin, which is actually one of the most aerodynamic. So applying that on aeroplanes to make sure that aeroplanes are more efficient. So this is typically, but it tends to be very much like our production centered in stages. But that does not mean that we're not very close to our customers, because that's really where the innovation and the need for innovation is really coming from.
No, thank you, Andrew. And that's brings me to Matthew. Matthew, your organization is part of the Europe climate neutral and smart cities and all those for which the financial instruments are being designed, and there's innovative financing which is coming out there. So some example from a carbon neutral or smart cities where you have seen that something which can be replicated either in terms of the financial instrument or as a project which we can replicate in Pakistan. Anything you can share from international market?
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, this wonderful panel. Allow me to give a super brief introduction about Bankers Without Boundaries, or BWB. So we are an asset management, investment banking, and financial advisory not-for-profit, which has one simple goal, which is to mobilize capital from where it is to where it needs to be, which is in projects that are focused under an environmental and social point of view. So we work in more than 45 different countries across the globe with the core business in Europe, Asia, and Africa, covering more than 10 different sectors, from agriculture to blue economy, from energy to infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So in relation to your question, let me give you two examples that give me a lot of hope in terms of the type of work that we do and how the market and the sector are currently developing. And those are examples not only related to the urban ecosystem, but also on a more sovereign or different types of stakeholders' point of view. So the first one is a tiger landscape project that BWB has been pioneering in the last few months. So the way it works usually for this type of nature-based solution projects is that you put together a financial instrument or a financial structure, and which is very traditional, and just a small part goes into the nature-based solution revenue streams, right, into the proceedings for this kind of activities. An example is the Rhino Bond, right, who was absolutely groundbreaking in the sector, but out of those 150 million of US dollars of that bond transaction, only, if I remember well, 20 million or 15 million went into the Rhino Bond conservation activities. So what we tried to do was to use a landscape approach, which basically means combining all the different activities that can generate revenue under a landscape perspective, which are ecotourism, ecosystem management, regenerative agriculture, and reforestation. So these four combined revenue generation activities will allow us to make this project sustainable under our IRR point of view, not just for the more traditional patient investors, but also for sort of more more traditional investors, not just the patient investors, but the more traditional investors. Of course, you need a different combination of capital, different combination of, in a sort of a blended structure, but it is much more revenue-oriented in comparison to previous nature-based solution projects. The second example that I want to give is a drought resilience series of projects that we are currently building. We know that this is also an issue here in Pakistan, and what we have been able to do is to basically build in this fund of, we want to start with around 300 million, and we hopefully are going to launch this very soon, that combines different types of activities that are connected to drought resilience. So usually, drought events are events that you try to tackle after that they happen, right? So we want to sort of circumvent a little bit the approach and saying, why don't we try to build the drought resilience infrastructures by combining solar energy, water salination, wastewater facilities, a combination of renewables and also agroforestry activities such as regeneration soil crops planting together with the renewables. So we put all these pieces together with our Center of Modeling Excellence, how we like to call it, and we realized that even in that case, that can create a very, very solid IRR, and that's why this is very welcome by all different types of investors. And I believe that these two types of projects can really be applied also to the Pakistan ecosystem as well.
No, thank you. Thank you, Matthew. I think the key message again, which we are seeing here, if we again, अगर हम सोच बदलेंगे तो हमें वो चीज़ें नज़र आना शुरू हो जाएंगी within the project, where we can really integrate the sustainability as well as the commercial return. And our learning, we are working in a built environment for a while now outside Pakistan and unfortunately in EU and US only right now. So significantly, we have seen a better return, price premium, a lower risk, so you get the better valuation at the same time. So these things we are seeing outside Pakistan right now. It's just the matter of believing here and start incorporating and integrating some of the sustainability technologies or nature-based solution within the projects, and that create a better return there. So I think I'll come to you from a clean energy. Energy is something which everybody's favorite topic right now. So if we pick up the clean energy and decarbonization, and how you see that as a globally, number one, what's happening there if we are talking about the net zero commitment, the progress we are making towards that, and the different kind of the technologies which have evolved, including the green hydrogen which you've been advocating for a certain time. So how you see the current position, where we are going in achieving 2050 net zero target, and how about the green hydrogen as an example there?
First of all, assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. And Asfar to you and the whole Nutshell team, great conference. So on the topic of energy transition, decarbonization, all of these are quite interlinked. And I think what we need to do is we need to sort of look at from the perspective of the context of each country and each geography. So from Pakistan's perspective, we all understand that our energy equation has been such that the costs have been high, and these costs impact every sector. So when we need to look at our decarbonization trajectory, our decarbonization energy transition journey, it needs to fit in with our own dynamics. Of course, it needs to be forward-looking, it needs to be future-oriented, yet we need to be practical. Sajid, you mentioned about green hydrogen. We've looked at green hydrogen a lot. We work in this space as well. My company, Planetary, we do a lot of research and project development across decarbonization and energy transition value chains. Green hydrogen's full potential needs to be understood with the nuanced understanding of both the opportunities as well as the challenges. When we talk about the opportunities, yes, there are opportunities because it can provide energy as well as decarbonize sectors, which otherwise cannot just be done by electrification, like transport, hard-to-abate industry, cement, and many others. Now, looking at the potential of it, the IEA estimates that about by 2050, 12% of the global energy needs can be met by green hydrogen. But obviously, that doesn't come only without its challenges. We must also look at the upcoming demand, which is an opportunity for Pakistan. The demand by 2050, just in dollar terms, and in my own opinion, that's probably a low number, is about $300 billion of market only for green hydrogen by 2050. And this is coming from various countries who have committed to their net zero goals. Pakistan can be a hub for providing these kind of sustainable fuels, but we also need to look at the cost. Globally, the cost of green hydrogen at the moment is about $3 to $7 per kg. And when we look at production of hydrogen, and production of hydrogen is nothing new, coming from fossil fuels, the numbers vary from $1 to $2 per kg. So although we work in this space, we like this, but we need to be very practical that along the spectrum of various colors, we need to see that what works best for us. So going into newer technologies, obviously the costs need to come down, but then there is a lot of policy support that also needs to be there. And I think we also need to see that where the demand hubs are, where the production hubs are, newer sort of large, super large investment projects, they require collaboration beyond borders. And I think Pakistan is in a good position, but of course we need policy stability. So bringing down the costs, having the right kind of infrastructure, and obviously having policy stability, these are absolutely key when we talk about any kind of investments. You talked about bankable projects. Bankable ROI is one, but I think policy stability is also extremely important. Yeah.
No, thank you, Ayla. And we will come to the global trend on the policy. We will be talking to Dr. Saiba for that. But before I'll go to Sadia, I'm not sure how many of you have seen the sustainability report of K Electric recently, and particularly the emission reduction. So I think there is a significant achievement. They have done almost 825,000 metric ton emission which are reduced by K Electric from 23 to 24. But the most interesting one, half of that reduction is coming from in-house, like scope 1 emission. So I think, Sadia, we would like to know what K Electric has done differently to reduce that kind of emission in a 1 year, and what we can learn from that, from a technology perspective and a policy perspective, what has done in KE to reduce that kind of emissions.
Thank you, Sajid. And again, I echo everyone's words here. Great job by Nutshell in putting this conference together. So on the emission side, I think a key defining factor for any organization is in the drive towards sustainability is when you put actions behind your words. And I think that's something that we were able to do at K Electric. The power sector or the energy sector is slightly late to the climate impact party, but the thing is that we're here and we have the ability to make significant impact. So small changes that we did in our scope 1 emissions gave that almost 0.8 million metric tons reduction, and that's 10% of my emissions. I was looking at companies that have the largest carbon footprint in Pakistan, and we're way up there in the top 5, and I don't like it. And as a company, we've made this a commitment that we're going to make sure that whatever we can within our realm, we're going to eliminate. I think the journey began when we started working on putting the targets into place. And I think if companies are serious about making an impact, it's set a goalpost and then tie yourself to it. I think disclosures. So when we said that we're going to put out a sustainability report, when you see it in black and white, it really makes a difference. I mean, last year or 2 years ago, K Electric was the first company to publish the gender pay gap ratio. Now, at that time, we only published it, but when it came out, there was this instant desire in everyone to make sure that it's levelized, and the next year it was. In fact, I think we got a little bit comped. So, and I think this is what sets us apart. To put that number in, so even today, I know for a fact that by 2030, K Electric aims to reduce its emission, scope 1, by 20%. We've done 10%, but in a sector like ours, the early stages, the beauty is that you're able to make a lot of progress, and that kind of gives you momentum. So we want to keep this momentum on, and I think having those goalposts very clearly articulated, and then a plan against it. So again, we're very clear that we want to move away from fossil fuels as much as possible. We need to ensure that power is, there's reliability also involved. Then there's the factor of affordability. So we made a few pledges, for example, that we're not going to generate any megawatts on imported fuel, for example, because there's a lot of disruption in the supply chain, and we need to ensure that energy security remains front and center. We also want to make sure that 30% of our power supply comes from renewable sources by 2030, where I think when we started the journey, we're sitting at 3, we're graduating towards 5, but the needle suddenly started moving when we set those goals in mind. And I think that pinpointing is great. For me, I think this is a great time to have this conversation in Pakistan, because we've got a lot of interest from SECP. They're working very hard to make disclosures. I think it's voluntary right now, but at some point they're going to be mandatory. The IFRS guidelines are going to kick in. So I think this will really drive it for everyone. And again, like I said, small steps by us really make a meaningful impact. So from certification of green buildings, making sure our offices were energy efficient, it also has to start from us. So I think all those goals, they laddered up, and I think we were also pleasantly surprised by the progress.
No, I think, Sandy, you raised a very interesting point. If we start having a right kind of visibility, right, so then it will drive a certain actions as well. So you're right, the SECP has got the ESG guideline, IFRS S1, S2 is there. Dr. Saba herself was a part of that ESG task force when Pakistan was deciding that what kind of standards they should be adopting. So visibility is one of a key area, and that's definitely drives action, and that action actually motivates other. Like when I saw your report, I was very pleasantly surprised. I was happy to see that there's a proper report, there's a proper tracking, and they're talking about the right disclosure. Ayla, you want to add something?
I just want to add to that there is actually 90% of the large global corporations, one way or the other, they do sort of comment, or they have something of sustainability in their reporting. And McKinsey has actually done a report which shows that the premium of these companies is actually 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
So what people understand is business case.
Exactly.
So I think there's a huge business case.
No, you're exactly right. The organization who have started managing, measuring, and reporting the climate risk, physical risk or transition risk, and the ESG as a whole, they are getting a better valuation. They are getting a low cost access to capital at the same time. So there is a business case even to start moving towards reporting. So I'll have one question with Dr. Shamshad, and then I'll come to audience for 2 questions, and then we will come back for final closing with the panels. So Dr. Saber, you were talking about the G20 in your in your keynote speech. So how G20 is looking at or taking as an approach to really manage the climate risk and the climate finance at the same time?
So my affiliation with G20 has been in my different careers. So first I have had a long-standing 30 years of career in the multilateral development banks, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank principally, but also you interact with the presidents of the other institution. So there obviously we looked at G20 simply because G20 members are the shareholders of the multilateral institutions. So we are accountable to the G20 members because they provide funding to us for lending. And they started to incrementally demand, had very high expectation on how we structure the climate finance and how much of it is going. So ultimately the response of that pressure now is that, for instance, World Bank has given, I think in 2024, about 42 or 45 billion dollars for climate finance. But ultimately, all the multilateral institutions have individuals as well as collective meetings to figure out how to strategize climate intervention, both in terms of the context of it and what to link it with, but also how much capital that they need to allocate. And I can tell you that virtually every institution, Infrastructure Bank, Asian Infrastructure Bank, ADB, the Inter-American Bank, and so on and so forth, now have a target which is much higher than they ever had, and they have special departments, as well as they're doing everything to mainstream in every World Bank or any other multilateral institution. So you have to, it's not tick box, it's actually when you go to management to present your project, it is scrutinized also at that level. So I have to say this is a sea change for the providers, for one, the institution that are major allocators of the capital pushed by the G20, but also in terms of the technical know-how that they have been able to groom. It's really very superior today than what it was. Now the second is that the G20 has its own international financial architecture framework. And since I was 5 years the Sherpa, United Nations Policy Sherpa of the G20 on behalf of the Secretary General, I have sat through every meeting of G20 for 5 years. And I can tell you that when we started G20, we were like from United Nations advocating SDGs, which has been talked about a lot. And also, and it seemed like, they were saying, what is this burden on us? This is United Nations nonsense. Usually earlier that was the, and then you will not believe IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde, who's now the EU president, she was one of the most strong advocate of sustainable development. And she and I used to sit together at the G20 along with other heads of the president. And I can tell you, it was a sea change. By the time we came to the Russian president, because every year it revolves, we came to the Russian president, we had breakthrough. We used to work till 4 o'clock. So you can't imagine the amount of sweat it has taken to change the lingual advocacy and all that. Now, the biggest thing that was taken up in G20 is get your infrastructure projects ready and bankable. And within the bankable, a point that was just talked about, that once you have your, when you are preparing these projects, they should be climate friendlier. And there are various aspects to it. And slowly then there was a strong emphasis to adaptation. And adaptation conference took place in Nigeria and Nairobi. So that was, and I was for almost that period that I was in New York, I was heading a 30-member finance task force. I'm narrating this to you that you will not believe the investment it has taken, United Nations, to change the mindset of 190 plus members of UN. And it was at the General Assembly 30-member finance committee session that I used to have day and night, meet the president, ambassadors individually and also others. And I think this advocacy is now paying dividend.
Yeah.
This architecture has emerged. It's a question of our propagating it here, and then, this ESG task force. I must say that ACCA played a very instrumental role in supporting me when I was doing the ESG, and they organized special platforms. So we had a partnership with the members locally here.
Thank you. No, thank you, Dr. Simon. Question from audience, and then we will come back to panel for a final comment. Any question? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Faisal Hafiz from Kifaya Investments. I wanted to ask about the carbon credit market. What is the plan of Pakistan about that? And my second question is building a dam part of adaptation strategy?
Who you want to direct?
I could respond to that. Yeah. So with regards to, building each country's carbon credit ecosystem is also very important, but I think what's very important is to see that, from the project perspective, yes, a lot of our projects on ground require the support of carbon credits. But we also need to see who are the off-takers, who are the buyers. So in that sense, we also need to integrate whatever we are doing with the regional and the global markets. Having said this, yes, the Ministry of Climate Change is working on a carbon credit policy, which would be rolled out fairly soon. We do not yet have carbon taxation, but we must look at that. Actually, businesses should start to work on those scenarios when a carbon tax will be implemented. And then we also need to see that we need to create transparency mechanisms. So I think carbon credits is, that ecosystem is building. There's a lot of work happening at the COP as well, and under Article 6 with regards to how various countries can sort of trade carbon credits amongst each other, and all what was talked about in the previous panel as well with regards to bridging the funding gaps. Yes, it is an important tool. And I think he asked something else as well.
The dam. So you want to add something? Matthew.
Yes. I just wanted to make one reflection on the carbon credit market, in particular to what could be also the case of Pakistan. So we have seen a bit of a shift in the market, right? So initially we had all these projects, reforestation project, but also clean cooking, et cetera, that in particular in relation to the reforestation projects, they want to entirely rely on carbon credits in terms of revenue generation activities. They say, we don't want to chop any trees, so that is going to be just carbon credits. And so what we did was to sort of implement a series of instruments and funds that just rely on that. Now, what we're seeing right now in the market is a slight shift into a different conceptions and idea over the carbon credits, which is maybe after the most recent scandals, I'm thinking about the South Pole one and a few others, the market is saying, you know what, maybe carbon credits, yes, are important, but it's better that in relation to some specific projects, we consider them only as an additional revenue generation sources, not as the main one. So the way projects have been structured is substantially changing because of this shift in the mindset towards the carbon credit. So the market is sort of reacting a bit with a later perspective in relation to the most recent developments under that point of view. It's definitely something to keep in mind for the Pakistan case.
And if I may just add on to that, very good point actually, is that a lot of these nature-based projects in particular, one of the key criteria for investors is permanence. They want to know that that carbon is going to be stored away, not for 2 years, 10 years, but 30, 40, 50 years, right? For that carbon credit to become valuable. how do you ensure that that carbon in that tree is going to be there 30, 40, 50 years? Carbon credit markets are unlikely to do that on their own, right? What will support that is if you can find income streams for the local communities, right? So people who are integrating agroforestry and other sustainable forestry products into their project design, so which I think is very relevant for Pakistan, where there's a lot of agricultural land that may be marginal or struggling, and you can complement your income streams with carbon credits, but critically, you need to fund the local communities through their existing agricultural practices, which they know what to do, they want to do that, and you're providing an income, and that's creating the environment that those trees will be there in 20, 30 years' time, because the local economy is also being supported with these other income streams.
Just on a dam side, yes, it's a part of the adaptation and mitigation strategy, depend how and why you are building one. So dams are part of it. Just a quick one. I'll come back for one more question if there's any.
I have.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have question from Ms. Sadia Dada, K Electric. Actually,
Yes.
I have a question. Why don't K Electric invest in solar panel development companies and wind power panel development companies? Because K Electric itself is would be actually a biggest customer in those companies, and by having cheapest solar panels and wind panel development wind panel development, it will be a great asset for not only country but actually the environment as well. So I would like to have your input on it. Thank you so much.
So just for your information, K Electric also has a subsidiary. It's called K Solar. So we are actively working in this space. As a player in the large market, I mean, we're looking at revenues about $2 billion. So the solar panel industry is still it's quite small for us. So we're not competing directly in the residential rooftop solar space, so maybe that's why that's not apparent to you. And I just sort of defer back to what Philip was mentioning, that when companies and even investors are investing, they want to walk into long-term arrangements. So rather than sort of having a transactional relationship versus our expertise is in having a lifetime relationship with our customers. So our focus on the solar side is predominantly to create long-term EPC contracts where we not only sort of help the customers in financing their solar panels, but also in their maintenance and contracting over the years. So proper power purchase agreements also. So we're working with large industries who have needs and they want to transition to solar. So you want to partner with them in their transition. So I feel that the general solar industry, it's very transactional, it's one-off, it's a product industry, and our expertise is in the service sector. So we're sort of, but we're pretty much there, and we do understand that this is really the future. The grid and the solar sector, they need to go hand in hand. So we're on that journey already.
Thank you, Satya. We are going to close that one, so we just have 2-3 minutes. So very quickly, your top 2-3 observations. Satya, we will start from you and we will come up to you, Dr. Saiba. Top 2-3 observation around the maturity level of businesses and public sector in terms of understanding the climate risks and opportunities. Opportunity is a key word there, and ability to develop strategies. So if you look at Pakistan as a scenario, or in general, we can take the globally as well if we want to go with that reference. So where we stand in terms of the maturity, let's say we take 1 to 10 as a rating.
Okay, so this is like being on the spot again. I would divide this scenario into sort of like a ladder. So at the bottom of the ladder, we have people who are absolutely oblivious to, it's a don't know, don't care phenomena. And unfortunately, we have a large body sitting in that. And then you've got those foundationers, they're aware, but they're also still sort of dwindling around the basics, So for example, they know about energy star appliances, they know about energy efficiency, they know about general climate risks. And then I think, again, what Maheen talked about in the last session, what really stuck with me was that, the maturity model, the key driver is whether you're reactive or you're proactive. Good economies need to be proactive. I think we're, by and large, even in the space, the limited space, which is aware, we're by and large reactive. So we may respond to, for example, flooding, and then, so you've got mitigants because you've experienced it, you want to probably address that risk. And I don't think we've done that very adequately. We still have flooding almost every alternate year.
Different segment has a different maturity level.
So I think very little pockets of Pakistan are in the advanced stage, and even those are either because your global team said so, or because the person you're exporting to said so, which is good. I think this pressure is fantastic. It should stay on. It will convert more and more people onto it. But I think we're very low on not just the ability to assess, and mitigation is, I think, even lower. We're moving up. I think that's a good sign.
Gradually.
So I don't want to be all pessimistic about it.
Philip, top 2-3 observation around the maturity level. How you see the maturity level for risk and opportunity.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that the picture globally is not good.
Okay.
Right, in terms of corporates' understanding of their climate risks and the transition plans that they need to be put into place. I mean, this is only I'm from the UK, and you only seen sort of a significant uptake in corporate reporting. That's actually come through legislation as well on climate-related risks in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, maybe. I mean, it is pretty new stuff. But it doesn't have to be, it's not such a big, daunting task as it may at first seem, which I think is what we all need to take heart of. And again, to sort of build on what Mahim was saying in the previous session, there are small incremental things that systems and reporting and monitoring processes that every company, everybody in this room, I am convinced, can go back to their desk tomorrow morning and start making small changes in the way that they are thinking about their business, how they're collecting information about their business. And these are the small stepping stones that go towards building a wider understanding and ultimately looking for that valuation premium that Sadi was referring to as well, that as soon as you understand these risks, then the market believes that you are better placed to capitalize on the opportunities in the future. So the two go hand in hand.
No, thank you. Andrew.
So I think in terms of maybe maturity levels, I think the effects of climate change are very easy to see in Pakistan. We've seen the floods. We're seeing in Lahore right now unsustainable practices together with climate change cause really severe situations. Generally, I think there is a lot to be done, but I think what I really want to focus is on the pockets of excellence that we see, particularly in, say, the export industry. So the textile industry is doing some amazing work to transform, to change, to make sure that the textile industry continues supplies into Europe. The other one, again, one of our customer bases is the sports industry in Sialkot. I'm absolutely amazed at the good work that is being done. But I think the other one, whilst there's a big need, the other side, which I really think Pakistan needs to do more, is there are really good, there's a compelling story, there's some very good examples, but we need to change the perception, and we need to change get some really good examples and good ambassadors to really change that picture. And I think that for me is really one of the key things. But again, I think the people, when you bring the people, the collaboration, the effect that the private sector can do, I'm very excited when you bring, again, from the chemistry, you bring all these ingredients together. I'm very excited with what can be done in Pakistan.
Thank you, Andrew. Matthew.
Yes. So
quick one.
Super quick. Try to giving a positive overview on all of this, so especially under a government and public institution perspective. So I think that BWB has been working with more than 50 different governments around the world, and in all those collaborations, we are talking about climate, and we're talking about sustainability, etc., etc. So very positive from that point of view. What it needs to improve are basically three different things. One is a better alignment between public and private interest, I would say, and it was all about this panel, I would say. The second point is we need to increase a little bit the local capacity, and this can be done in thousands of different ways. And the third point is actually what Andrew said in terms of changing the perception, especially on the private sector side, when it comes to investing in innovative sustainability-focused projects or instruments.
Thank you. Ayla.
Sure, yes. So my three top observations. So number one, I think, although your question is with regards to only public organizations, with private sector involved, we can't do much.
No, private sector.
So it has to be sort of for both. So I think there's increasingly enhanced awareness of the climate risks. I mean, climate risk, biodiversity loss, supply chain disruptions, environmental degradation, etc., because this is all linked also to the business case as well. So there is enhanced awareness of all these risks, which is a good thing. My second observation would be that there are varied sort of approaches to transition and addressing these climate risks, and hence the local context and with regards to the availability of resources and also the regulatory frameworks, it is all different, and which is fine. Obviously, some countries need to do better, but I think we need to see that what's the starting point of each country or each sort of geography. My last observation, obviously there are lots of observations, but I'll just limit to three, is that there are a lot of challenges in implementing and scaling, and this is where the right kind of structuring comes in place. If the project structuring or an investment is structured addressing all these risks, the financial sector does come in to fund. So it is about how do we address all the risks? How do we put that in the project structuring, all the mitigants, and then make comfortable all the project sort of stakeholders. So I think I would say that these are my top observations.
Thank you. Dr. Saiba.
I guess the scenario is somewhat patchy. In public sector, it is not very impressive, because I have been as a Minister of Finance and Governor, and I was really amazed when I talked to my colleagues in a ministry or in ECC, and it was like, excuse me, what is this added burden? But my interface with the private sector has been very impressive.
Okay.
Because it's the non-profit organizations in Pakistan who have the needed skills. They have hired the right people, no matter how costly they are, and they are leveraging the thought process. And these are, in fact, there was a group, they approached me to join them, and when I joined, it was not even a company. So my first advice to them, please give it a status so that it's a sustainable organization. And I must say they were very respectful, and immediately I got them the license from SECP or whatever is required. And now what they have done is, we said we have to strategize the thinking process. The most industry that will be hit sooner or later is the export-oriented industry.
Yes, definitely.
Because they have to sell their product abroad, and this is FX earning. And all the export-oriented industries we approach, most of all the textile action, as was pointed out, they went on a fast track because there's value addition and all that. And we invested heavily from the Pakistan Environment Trust Fund. We were all kind of working pro bono in that group. And it's really those type of setups, if we can mushroom them across the country, they will achieve a substantive breakthrough. I think in the government, the primary knowledge has to be, education has to be there. And lastly, the Ministry of Climate Change is still evolving, to put it in a diplomatic manner. While obviously this is their bread and butter, but it's a bureaucracy. And I think the more they involve independent people who can actually tell them straight. You know, people who are co-opted on the boards can often get compromised. So I think this is where the action is needed, because the 2017 legislation or act, whatever it is, that needs to be revised and made more aggressive. And that should be what people should be looking at when it comes to the legal framework, the regulations and all that, so that everything is mainstreamed across the public sector. Last point is, this environment is now a subject of provinces. And, you know, donors go to the provinces, donors come to Planning Commission and offer their services. And when I was in the Ministry of Finance, I said, you know, stop this shopping. You know, we need to have a centralized approach so that we are directing, particularly the concessional funding, in an effective manner to where it belongs. And the Ministry of Economic Affairs has a role to play. So I think it's an institutional issue also there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, great panelists. Just to close that one, I think there are key terms which we will be using. The one term which I really loved is the collaboration beyond the border. So from banking beyond the borders to collaboration beyond the border. So we have to learn what's happening around the world. That's one thing. For the overall solution side, if you look at that, the policy matters. The policy and regulations, it's important. The reporting, the visibility. Funding is an important element. Solution is an important element. But everything which is tied up through, that's the capacity, the talent, which can help us to really bring all these three things together. So I think we close on that note, and thank you very much, panelists, and thank you very much for such a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Testing, testing. Thank you for another truly inspiring panel, and we are obviously so honoured to be joined by such an inspiring group of thought leaders, clearly a driving force behind addressing climate risks and finding climate solutions. May you please all stay on the stage for the presentation of these souvenirs. Dr. Shamshad will be presenting the souvenirs for both panels. Please could the current panel stand up, and I'll call your name to be presented for your souvenirs. I would also like to call Asfar and Amir Shahzad, the Executive Director of Unity Foods Limited, to join them on stage. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would all stand, our first gift will be presented to Ayla Majid. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Ayla Majid. So let's give that another round of applause to Ayla Majid. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And next up, we're going to have Sadia Dada. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause, please. Thank you very much. And could Philip Skinner please be presented next? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep it going. Bit more energy in the room. Thank you very much. And our next souvenir will be for Andrew Bailey. And come on, ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Andrew Bailey. And for our next presentation will be Matteo Scalabrino. Let's keep the round of applause going, ladies and gentlemen. We're honoured to have these guests on stage with us here today. And not to forget Sajid Aslam. And not to forget Dr. Shamshad. Could we please get Nasir Akhtar to come up and present Dr. Shamshad? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause. Thank you. And we still have one more panel to present our souvenirs. So I would also like to ask Dr. Shamshad to stay on afterwards. We have our last panel to be presented with the souvenirs. So Dr. Shamshad, could you please stay on stage? Also you, Asfar, thank you very much. So now I would like to call up the previous panel to be presented with their souvenirs from Dr. Shamshad. Could Faisal Mohammed Al-Shamari please join us on stage? Ede Borbeli, Maheen Rahman, Amir Shazad, and Dr. Fatima Krishnad. Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Let's keep the energy going. Round of applause to our esteemed speakers. We are almost at our final session of the day, so one last round of applause for our esteemed speakers.